Okay, so Jens, wow. And Mark Moskowitz. Interesting. Mark just happened to come here, and we're like, Mark, will you be on our show? We're glad you're here.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
Nice
I mean,
to
we're
meet you.
talking about something that when Mark said that, he's a documentary filmmaker, that's kind of our background. It's what our love is. And so we thought, okay, we'll talk about what I like to call the one-take environment. You get one shot at this thing to get it right, and it's not as easy as some people think. Got Rachel on the line here. She's going to be taking your questions. How you doing?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Yep, I am hanging out in the chat to talk about whatever you'd like to talk about and take your questions, pass them along to the guys. And that's it. So say hi. Let us know what you want to talk about.
Okay, so I think the best thing to do is we're going to show some clips from what we've done, and we're going to show a clip or two of what you've done, and then we're going to react to it. But I want to talk about interview style, things like this, because really documentaries are typically interviews, reenactments, and B-roll.
Yeah, there's techniques. It's not just asking a question and throwing it out there. There are techniques to get what you want.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to play that first clip of mine, and we'll start with that.
There's no one thing that makes a great leader. I'm often asked, are leaders born or made? And I believe that mostly they're made. Of course, they have to be born, because they wouldn't exist if they weren't born. And there are some characteristics that probably they need that will help them, that are inherited, but mostly leaders are made. People can train themselves to be leaders. People can certainly train themselves to be better and more effective leaders by studying other people, by looking at what works for other people and then trying to apply that to them, and from listening to the people around them and trying to give people around them the sense that they can openly and honestly communicate with. Don't be one of these people that is sort of a dilettante. Be somebody who really tries to learn and understand the organization that you're responsible for. And whether it's a complex business organization, learn as much about that business as possible, so that it gives you, among other things, your own basis for independent judgment when people are giving you advice. The most effective test of a good leader is whether the people that work with you come to you because they really need your help and advice, because you really know what you're doing, or they come to you just because they have to. And if it's the first, if they come to you because you add real value, it means you really understand the organization you're running.
So this was right after 9/11, and we were hired by Nextel to do an interview with him, and they wanted to hear him say how Nextel phones helped after 9/11. But I did many other things because I wanted to just have a nice video. But the point is that we weren't allowed to have B-roll, so there were some limitations. And this is how the thing came about. He had just written a book called Leadership. So I read the book, and number one, you need to know more about the person that you're interviewing than they know.
Exactly. You have to. When I used to do CEOs, and I've done 1,200 politicians, Democrats mostly. I have a lot I could do 45 minutes just on this. When I would go to a CEO, and the idea of interviewing these people as opposed to having them speak right to the lens is, one, half the people can't speak to the lens and just garble it, so you get more fish. You also are hoping to create an authenticity by doing it, but you've got to know your shit, because I used to study like the entire annual report, bond. I'd study for days before going in with a CEO to get them to be natural and convey stuff, because you only get back what you give. And there's no respect in their eyes. You're just the video guy otherwise. But if you can have a real conversation with them about something, be as passionate as they are, you can drive it.
Well, the interesting point is that the moment they know that you know what they're all about,
That's it.
that's when they, like, I'll give you an example. So he walks in the room and they paid him $250,000 for 1 hour. He walks in the room and he goes, "You got 15 minutes." And I'm like, "I'll get it in 5.
Yeah.
But the point was, the very first question I asked him is, "What do you love about baseball?" And he's like, "What?"
Yeah, right.
I said, "Everyone knows you love baseball. What do you love about baseball?" And he goes, "Well," he starts talking about it. I said, "Stop." I said, and I'm more of the aggressive interview style. I said, "What do you love about baseball?" Not "what is baseball?" And you could see his eyes well up when he said, you walk in and you smell the peanuts, you smell the popcorn. You need to do that to immediately get rapport with the person. It's like
you disarmed him kind of and threw him for a loop, and now he had to really think instead of just go through the motions.
Yeah, when you only have 15 minutes, that's you're you know.
Well, we got the hour.
Right.
Because we got the hour because he all of a sudden felt super comfortable and got to talk about the things he loved.
No, you engaged him.
Exactly.
And so the time just flew.
And some of these people are super pros. I mean, Giuliani's been on camera, you know, a zillion times before he saw you, you know. And so, I mean, I've done these guys. For instance, there was a CEO of DuPont I did once, and he was so good. The thing is, you got to shake them out of their like comfort zone. So I'd studied the stuff, and he's laying it out there, but there's no passion, and it's sort of he's bored with it, but he's doing the message, he's doing it okay. And I could see the guys in the other room. I don't let anyone in the room when they do the interview. Either I'm shooting it and talking to the guy, or it's me and sound, or that's it. But all the other management is out in the hall. You know, they're on monitors.
We do the
they're
same.
looking. Yeah, you got to clear the room.
Yeah.
So in other, I watched as people worried about their mortgage payments, their BMW payments, whatever, go south. As I said to him in the middle, I cut him off in the middle of something. First, the guy cut him off, you know, and then I said, that's just horseshit. Like the stuff you put into Brazil was this. You mortgaged the companies of welfare for that. And I kept talking. Now these were the film days. You're burning film, you know. So as soon as I watched, and as soon as he leaned forward, like I just did when I had a focus problem, I shut up, and he went into. Well, let me tell you something. One, we Two, the company is now better.
Yes.
Three, and he did it in 35 seconds, what he had blabbered for 20 minutes to do. But you have to sometimes stick a needle in the person.
Yes, I agree. And especially with politicians and CEOs, because they're going to give you a stump speech.
Yeah.
So like the moment you ask them a question, they have a pre-prepared answer. So you have to mix it up. That's why I like poking the bear, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I know that I've poked many bears before, but
or charm them like you did with the baseball thing. Either way, you got to get them somewhere.
You got to take them out of their stump speech.
Exactly.
So let's start talking about the questions, which is a big deal.
You mean about not giving them the questions ahead of time?
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
like,
there's
I
that
know
too,
that
right.
you go both ways on this.
Yeah.
I
It
personally,
depends who they are.
I have never given questions in my life. They asked for questions, and I said no. And they said, well, then we'll get somebody else. And we had a big deal where they wanted, who was that guy?
I never give people the questions, but what I always say to those people who are the people who say, well, we got to have the questions, I say, but the questions don't matter. It's only the answers that matter.
That's a good answer.
Let's just get them to say, what do you want to have said, and what's the message? Give me that, and I'll get it out of them in a completely natural, real way.
Right. Now, what we're talking about, I want people to understand, is these are commercial types
These
of
are
interviews.
paid. They're pay for hire things.
Yeah, because
right.
we're creating
As opposed to
propaganda at this
documentary
point.
stuff. Yeah, right.
In a documentary, you would never want to do that. You'd want to follow the story.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to give a couple of my key things away. And one of them is what I sort of alluded to before, which is I will never, ever ask a question that A, could have a yes or no answer, or B, that will not evoke an emotional response, because you have to be able to see that welling up in their eyes a little bit. And so like instead of saying, what do you like about what you do, say, what do you love about what you do?
Right, and then I sometimes try to put people back in a different space. So when you find out something, you know this ahead of time about them, and you say, so when you're sitting in your living room and you're reading your biographies that you like to read, put yourself in that space for me. Or you're there, it's 7 o'clock at night, you've eaten dinner, it's your quiet time, you're 800 pages into somebody's 4-volume biography that you're doing. What is it? Tell me about it. If you can get them out of the set and get their head in another space, sometimes you can, emotional stuff, it really can produce emotional things. If you have to trying to get somebody to cry or really emote, you know, put yourself back in the hospital room 8 years ago when your daughter was there. Are you there? Can you see the nurse? Do you see the IV?
That's
good.
good.
And then you can do that. I was going to ask you, in shooting these things, you have choices all the time about where you got to be, and you guys are probably communicating when you do that somehow.
Yeah, we
but you trust
well,
him. Right?
we were going to get into that.
Okay.
In a
We
little
can
bit.
wait
I
for it
think
then.
we should say that you and I have been doing this for about 35 or 6 years. so that he knows when I'm going to go for the tears. And that's when you got to have a zoom lens. Step one, got to have an E&G type zoom lens, or a micro force, or some way that you can creep in. Don't start fooling around with dollies and all this kind of nonsense. You need to be able to go for the eyes. And Jens knows the kinds of questions, or at times I'll do this deal. Where I know I'm going to want to go for the eyes because I'm going for tears, and he knows. But you had brought something up earlier that I wanted to discuss, which is angles. So like typically Jens is right here with his lens, because I want to get that eye line, a certain way. I've noticed let's roll your clip in a second, because your eye line is a totally different type of thing. And then we'll roll another clip where we did a completely different eye line.
But this is for a documentary thing. When I'm doing that kind of work, I'm much more attuned to what you did there. It's similar to what you did.
Yeah, you like to get the eye line much closer to the camera.
Before we move on to that, though, let's just talk a little bit more about that communication. It's a lot of times we're not directly communicating. After a while, you got to get to know, as a shooter, to listen to the question that's asked, and then the response, and then know when to move in or move out, or how to position that person. So there's an instinct that you kind of evolve and get to know about the framing and all that.
Well, and the other thing is that if a lot of these I shoot myself, but if you're in the clip you're going to see mine, we actually had two cameras in one, and we took that weird eye line thing you're going to talk about there. But when you got to work with somebody that you're that in tune with, who is not worried about the backlight or this or that happening when you're talking to a rape victim and she's telling you, she's opened up to you and she's never opened up to anybody else. People will be surprised how many times I've done countless cancer victims, and you'd be surprised how many times people will tell you something they haven't told their husband, they haven't told their wife or daughter or whoever it is, but they'll tell you if you're sensitive to it. Like they tell things to a psychiatrist sometimes.
Exactly. Well, the one thing that I didn't describe is that Jens is my cinematographer and I'm the director. So really his job, he's actually the director and the cinematographer of the scene, because I can't be bothered with that. And I am the director and the editor. So as I'm asking questions, I'm listening, kind of like we're doing now, and thinking about how I can make my interview style an entire conversation where I don't stop and look at my notes. Because I think the second you do that, you take that person out of that moment. So the interview with Giuliani, we spoke for 1 hour constantly, and I never looked at notes or did anything. I'm listening to him and I'm thinking, okay, when I edit this, he said this, and I can bounce to this, and from that I can go to this. Let's show your clip and we'll get back into that.
Just before we pop into that, we've got a question from Victor, which is potentially quite appropriate and possibly tongue-in-cheek, but I know Victor's leaving, so before you get out of here, Victor, he says, any tips for when a person just keeps talking to interrupt them?
Yeah, I interrupt them. I'm like, okay, I don't mean to, sometimes I'll be, we got to keep these. One of the things you need to do is you got to tell people from the get-go that this, in this world, you got to keep your answers short.
In the old days, you had to keep them short because it was film and it was expensive. It was thousands of dollars film. So what I ended up doing in the old film days is I had a remote control on the camera to start and stop it. So I would only go for the stuff, the Nagra rolled the whole time, but I would control the film even if I wasn't behind the camera.
That's brilliant.
I controlled it. And that's why, that was what people did for years. That was the beginning of a lot of cutaways, is because you couldn't afford to shoot, you could only shoot one roll of film, but your guy might talk for an hour. So you couldn't.
So you shut it off even though they're talking.
You'd miss stuff. Sometimes you'd miss stuff. But what you only went for, and this gets back to how you edit these things, what we should talk about later, what you only went for, you realized you were missing some stuff, but you looked at him and you rolled when he was when he was visual, when he was alive, when he was passionate, no matter what the message was. But I interrupt them. You can't, in a nice way, or
you gotta say, sometimes I'll do this, I'll say, wait, that's actually a good point, but I want to move to something. But you brought up something that I don't think people understand. The Nagra is your audio recorder. You got in
the old days.
In the old days. But what was brilliant about that concept is that you still had the audio, so you could use B-roll if you needed to do it.
Right.
So that was a smart move, and I agree with you. We with film, it's expensive as hell.
Yeah.
But did you notice that when you shut the camera off and they were talking, did they notice that?
No, they didn't
and
notice.
then
It was
change?
no, it was all baffled. It was all done.
Yeah.
Nobody
it's
knew
gotta be pretty
the camera.
silent.
And we would also do the things like I would have the DP, leave the room, say he's got to get a new battery,
Yeah.
and then I controlled the camera. The sound's just running out in the
Right,
hallway
yeah,
somewhere.
great.
And I'd say, I got a new battery. We'd set this up ahead of time, and then suddenly the whole tenor of the guy comes down. And it's like, I'd say, that was really interesting. He says, yeah, but what I didn't tell you, da, 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 da. And I'm just roll it.
Oh
And
God,
we have
that
it.
battery thing. How many times have we the battery dies at the greatest moment in history? You're like, oh my God, no, because you cannot get that back.
Right.
It's like shooting a death scene. That's it. You
Or-
get one
or a
shot.
wedding,
at that. Or a wedding. That's why I started this saying we're doing a one-take environment. It's never the same twice.
It is
Oh, and let's roll your clip, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
There's a million reasons that it's much more difficult with a woman in the band, and particularly in those days. Pete was pushing me to do more, kind of get more modern with all this stuff, and I just said no, 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 and we were kind of having an argument about it in the living room of our farmhouse, and Ringo was there. They were doing a photo shoot for the record, and he backed me up on it. He said, no, that should be done, in the pure form, and so Pete wouldn't have listened to me probably, but he did listen to Ringo.
Through this record.
Oh,
I remember
sure.
that record. I
I
remember
had
that
this record. I had this record. I loved this. And then I met Tracy later on, and I was so in awe of her.
I didn't have that one.
She was a dynamo. I loved her.
For me,
Down
I
so
remember
low.
hearing that. Yeah, that's where I'm going to get all opinionated on it. I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't
you-
love this.
psst,
Yep.
psst.
Yep.
Down so low.
I wrote it before we even had the record deal. I got my heart broken by Steve Miller, which I used to not admit, but now I... In fact, the last time it made me some money was in a movie. And I sent him a thank you letter. I just said, for years I've been dining out on what a dick you were to break my heart, but now I realize I owe you a big thank you.
We're talking the whole time because we're just so enamored
Caught me
by it.
looking.
That was really nice. I like that.
That's from an upcoming series that's an 8-hour, 10-part series called It Was the Music that'll be on one of the streamers next year.
That's great.
Next year, yeah.
So I noticed, okay, so let's talk about the two different kinds of interviews. I call it the Barbara Walters interview, which is where the interviewer is in the actual thing. And then there's the kind that we've done our whole lives up until doing these stupid live shows. I don't want to call them stupid.
Yeah,
but,
you do.
no, but it's not really, we never envisioned doing this sort of an interview, but every interview that we ever did, we were not in the interview. So you had to ask the questions in such a way that it stood on its own.
Right. So, when I do the interviews like you do them, I sometimes also push myself in there. I just cut it later, but I get right in the frame sometimes to violate someone's space or to get in or stay, and then I sort of just step back right at the moment and realize somebody's shooting around me. So I don't always just sit locked down.
But most of the time, you're asking the question so that they would reiterate the question and the answer.
Oh, that's the other
Well,
thing.
well, there's sometimes you do directorial stuff, which is if you know what the answer you want is, you just get them to say it and you direct them. There's ways to direct people.
Yeah.
And many people are just lazy and they don't direct the people. They just let them say what they want. And you can. I've been interviewed, countless times by journalists, and I'm always thankful for the writer who cleans up my remarks and makes me sound better or smarter than I am, rather than just verbatim, So I do the same with that. I say, well, why don't we say that again, but how about say it this way? And then the trick is not to have them make it dead, but there's ways to get them to make it alive again. And sometimes I say, just parrot me, and sometimes I say, no, and sometimes I get lots of energy. No, louder, bigger. In other words, if you get bigger, they get bigger. If you get quiet, somebody's too big, you get quieter, they get quieter. People mirror,
It's like being a conductor almost,
Yeah. Well, we've done things where we say to people, say this and finish the sentence. Because I know I need one person to say that. And I'm editing in my head. You have sort of this Errol Morris style, I can tell, which is a very aggressive style. I mean, we do too. I mean, you have to decide like Barbara Walters has much more of an emotional style, but she's in the interview.
Well, she's kind of the talent
Well,
too, which
yes,
is
she
different.
is. It's a different
To
style.
me, that can be distracting.
So there's a
sometimes,
few
too.
things of that clip, though, that show different things. One is what we talked about at the beginning, if you know your subject. So I know a lot about music and the records and all the artists I went to talk to in this. So I could talk to them instantly on that level. So when Tracy Nelson, who hadn't been interviewed in 30 years, who was one of the first women band, I mean, she was the archetypal, what's the word?
Archetypal.
Archetypal, female lead in a band with Mother Earth in the late 60s, I mean, even more than Grace Slick, because she was her band, she wrote the stuff, and then just disappeared from sort of the business for years. I knew all her music. I knew it then. I knew it contemporaneously back then. So when I dug her up and found her, and everyone thought she was not even alive anymore, and she agreed to talk to me, we got talking about those records and times, and she just let stuff out. So in that interview, she talks about she dated Steve Miller, the guitarist for years. It says when Steve dumped her, she wrote this song, and what a dick he was. She's never told that to anybody. She never put it that way. So her trust in me within a half hour to actually say stuff was that. Another thing in those clips I do is I use props when I can. So with Roseanne, that was Roseanne Cash and her husband John Leventhal, who were the other people in there who Roseanne had loved Tracy. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about Roseanne and her music taste when I went in there, although I knew her music. But I happened to bring a bunch of records as props. I could have easily pulled out, she talked about Traffic and Cream. I had a bunch of records with me. And we did, and you don't see it in the show, but we talked about Traffic and we talked about this, because bringing out the record evoked a response. So I said, no, gamble, maybe Tracy, maybe I can weave this in. And sure enough, she went for it, right? And I think what's nice about that is it's hard to do two people sometimes in an interview. We all
that was
struggle with
interesting.
that.
I haven't really seen that.
But I like doing that with the people. Sometimes you can get the other person to create something with the other person. You don't have to create it, they're creating it, especially in a husband-wife situation. So when she tells her husband John, when he's spoken, I don't really like that record, blah, 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 and finally she says, zip it. It says everything about that, it says a lot
great.
there.
I like that you can create conflict like that,
Yes,
which is in
right.
a documentary
Yes.
is hard to do.
Right.
But it's funny, when you said what she was all about, you basically read the log line for Searching for Sugarman. It was just kind of interesting if you think about it. All right,
Guys, can I hop in
Yep.
with a couple comments here? We've got, excuse me, Mark. When you were talking about mirroring your subject, that can help.
Yeah.
We've got a great comment here from Vincent Singleton, who says, "I think one of the most important techniques in an interviewer's repertoire is attentive silence. Let the subject talk and don't try to outgab them. If someone feels like you're listening, they talk more and more openly and let little truths slip out. Then adjusting your energy, give clues to them that makes interrupting less disruptive." I think is a great comment.
Yes, but I the other side of that is in a lot of the work I do, I want my point of view reflected, and so not necessarily that person. So sometimes it needs shading or pushing somebody into a subject matter that I want to discuss. I don't want their agenda necessarily. I want them on my agenda. So one of the things to go with is when I go into the interviews, I think of what do I want out of this person? What do I want out of this scene? I'm not going in open-ended. Let's just go in and talk to this person because they're famous and see what we get, and we'll then honestly present what they wanted to present to me.
It's not news. You're not just going.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's different schools of thought on this. I mean, it depends if you're making a propaganda film, which
Yeah.
we have been doing a lot in our life,
Right.
or if you're making a true documentary and, what the journey of your story needs to be. I would agree with him. That's one style. And there are times when we've done that style,
me
and
too.
there are times when you need the aggressive style because they come in with a pre-programmed response to every single thing you say.
Right. To give, I have a story, a quick funny story about that. Where that actually happened is I had to interview Edward Teller for a big film on nuclear energy years ago. Edward Teller was the guy who was the physicist who helped create the atomic bomb and all the stuff that happened in the labs in Los Alamos and Papa in the time. And when I got to him, it was probably in the 90s. He was like 80-something years old, 88, 87 years old. It was like his last interview. So we lit this dramatic stage, like Vlad, boom, and he's there. And all we're going to see is him, you know, in this dramatically lit sort of thing. And I said, I spent 2 weeks studying all this kind of stuff about him to do what we've talked about, you know, like when you read Giuliani's book. I get in there and I said, yeah, Dr. Teller here, you know, it's an honor to be, boom, 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 boom. There's 2 ways we can do this. The way I'd like to do this is ask you these questions and take you through. And I go through this long, involved question of whatever, to showing off whatever I knew, trying to get him to talk. And he looks at me, I've finished, and he looks at me and he says, I'll just talk.
Oh my God, a few of those.
And then he talks for 20 minutes and gets up and leaves.
Okay, we had a situation.
And it was great, by the way, it was great. He was right. He made the right call there.
We had a situation very similar where Deloitte and Touche wants us to go interview Peter Drucker. So we're like, oh my God, this guy's 90, he's a legend, you know. We get in there, he walks in, he goes, there will be no questions. I will speak for 20 minutes and you will turn the camera on.
Sound familiar?
And then you will leave.
It's exactly the thing.
So, but that was not what they wanted.
Yeah.
So he started to talk and I was like, oh, I was confused. I thought that when I read your book, you meant this. And he's like, no. And I initiated a conversation with him because I pretended like I didn't know what he meant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You played dumb. That was good.
Yeah. And in that situation,
he had to explain.
it. And then we had a conversation going at that point.
That's good. I was cowed and I gave in. Afterwards, the client said to me, do you think we have it? And I said, we have this. You want Teller in your film because he's Teller, right? He goes, yeah. And I said, we have it.
We have that. Yep. But it's a good point, Jens. You can either play dumb, you can play aggressive, you can question him. You can question him and say, wait a minute, that's not what you said earlier. And then he'll get aggressive. You know, these are things, you got to play this all out in your head live.
Sometimes psychiatry.
Yeah, it is psychiatry.
Sometimes there's crazy stuff that happens, and sometimes you just have to make it work. I did numerous things with NBA players over the years, and I ended up working with Michael Jordan a number of times. But the first time I worked with him, he came in, and we had to get this, 5-minute little piece from him for a sponsor, and he comes in, and we've been there all morning, set up, lit, waiting for him. He comes in through the back room, he comes. This is when he was, 96, 97. He was like that he was in the height of whatever. And he comes in and he sits down, and we've got a stool, it's lit, and he's about this. And I'm talking, he's incredibly nice, incredibly smart. He knows right on the ball, he knows what this has to be. And we start talking. About 30 seconds in, the sound guy says, I changed my battery. Like we've had all morning, he could have,
Right. Oh God, no, okay, so if your battery's dying, just stop. Don't play dumb. I've had that happen before.
Jordan says, what are you guys, fucking amateurs?
Yeah.
And like really hostile, right?
Yeah.
And the only way to do it is, I didn't say anything, I just said, okay, it's take 2, let's go, blah, 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 and I just pushed him through it. And he got good. Mm-hmm. And he called me to do all these things because the interview was so it actually, I think, broke him saying, I realized about him later, that's just the kind of guy he is. He's always on your, and the other athletes he played with, he's a fear, he wants to create fear in everybody around him, right?
He pushes them.
Right, so if you're not bullied and you stay there hanging and you bully back a little bit, he then respects you. He did a great interview, it was great, and then for the next 5 or 8 years, I did half a dozen pieces for him where he would actually ask, can I come do it? The first time I came was like 2 years later that he asked that I come do this thing when he was head of the NBA Players Association with him. I came in and I said, we worked together a couple years ago. He said, yeah, I know, you're the fucking amateur.
Okay, great.
I want to jump in with.
Wait, hold on one
just
sec, Rachel. I want to make a quick comment, and then you're coming back. Jens took that cord off of you. That is a documentary thing we need to talk about. There's situations where somebody's talking and there's something is bugging the crap out of me, a light stand, something's in there, a reframe needs to be done. Right. Just do it because you don't want it'll bug the shit out of you when you get in a post. Right. You can put a teeny B-roll shot on to cover it.
Right. I just keep the conversation going and go do it.
And just go do it.
And keep the conversation
Sorry, Rachel.
going.
We needed to talk about that.
No, you're good. You're good. We've got a couple of questions here getting lots of likes. I want to make sure we get them in. Bill Robertson says, what % of the time do you run boom mic versus lav mic? And also, do you always run an independent audio recorder as well as a camera audio?
I always boom and tack, and I'm a weirdo. I don't know. I take that back. We tacked for decades and loved tacks. Now all of a sudden we like booms. It depends on the environment you're in. If you have a very dead room, then the boom is going to be fabulous. If you use Sanken mics, which are wonderful open tack mics, they sound great in a live environment. It's good to boom and tack if you can, because then you have the choice of what to do.
I've gone back and forth for years. I abhorred double system for years when I shot film. When I first started shooting on all the digital cameras, I didn't want to do any more double system. I had said the sound's got to go into the camera, and even if it's umbilical corded, I don't care. Make guys figure it out. Then we started radio miking back to the camera. From you can boom from the radio, you can boom and radio into the camera. But every single sit-down interview I do is boomed. I mean,
you don't tack.
Sometimes if it's noisy, I will. But otherwise,
But you don't boom and tack.
No.
All right. Well,
It's nice to mix that sometimes.
Yes, I mean sometimes I do, but I always end up using the boom unless it's noisy. Now, there's another scene I brought where I have a guy walking around, and an example of talking to somebody in action as you're doing something.
Well, yeah, it's different.
Yeah, then they're loved, but we also have a boom.
But in our situation here, if we were boomed right now, I think it would sound terrible in this environment, especially with the noise upstairs.
Well, no, the bigger issue is the boom is fine if you can get within 2 feet of the guy's head. Look at this shot right now.
Yeah.
The boom's going to be a mile high. Booms only work good if they're super, super, super close.
More importantly, just monitor for whatever you're doing. You know what I mean?
The other thing is that this is an important point. A boom will pick up more ancillary sound. Right. So like right now, we're hearing cars on the expressway and people dropping stuff above us, but you don't hear it on the show because the pickup range is very small with the tack.
I would say that if you're booming, the real difference is if you have a really great sound guy or boom operator who's just specialized in boom, the axis of some of the mics is so critical. I mean, when somebody's really good at this, and their access and they know it's here, or in a documentary, I shot this thing in California last week with the first woman sound person I've ever worked with. She was fantastic. A young woman in her early 30s, and I watched her mic technique on the boom, and she was just totally invisible, totally fantastic. And I noticed how sometimes she would pull back away when I would tend to be closer if I was booming, and she backed off, because if you know your mics and you know how they're aligned and what the best place is. But it's not, being a sound person is not just like plugging in a mic and going, I mean
most of the interviews we did not have a sound person.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why we would set up a boom with a boom mate on a C-stand. We would use a lav mic. Number one, my policy is if you can use a cord, man. Do not. Why would you want to add a potential disaster in the making to have a wireless system if they're not moving?
Well, right. I decided some time ago a lot of this nonfiction work, whether it's pay-for-hire documentary stuff, is sound-based. You got to get the sound, and the sound has to be good. You can put any pictures on. I can cut to anything.
That's our philosophy.
As Earl Morris has shown, he'll cut to anything sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
And it works because he's got the sound. It's almost like doing a podcast, with pictures.
Yeah, no, I mean we have a line that we always say is that
you can tolerate bad picture, but you could never tolerate bad sound.
No, it's bad
Something
sound
like
is
that,
intolerable. Bad picture could be a creative choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I like
You had
that,
another
Rachel.
question, Rachel?
I agree.
Yeah, I've got a question from Jeremy Berger, who asks any advice for solo directors or DPs about maintaining eyeline while checking frame.
I know, I do that all the time. I shoot a lot of stuff as a DP director, interviewed stuff, and
Great question.
it is. It's a really good question. Sometimes I put a monitor behind the person, okay, so out of frame, so I see it. I'm looking at the person, but I can see it there. I often shoot with my eye to the viewfinder, and then as I'm asking the question, and then sort of back off the viewfinder. I used to cover it in the film days and just back off here, for that, so they're looking at my eyes. And people often say to me, I mean, people are sophisticated now. Do you want me to look in the lens? Do you want me to look at you? And I say, look at me. Or I say, look in the lens.
Right.
But doing it yourself, you can do it yourself. The trick to doing it yourself, and I've paid the price by many times by being too involved in the technology, is you got to stay engaged with the person. You can't start with you can't start changing iris. You can lenses, switching, whatever. Once you get going, you got to be engaged with the person, even if you're. And then once in a while you look over, you realize, oh, the drifted. I got to bring it back. And
yeah, I don't like that myself. I mean, okay, so here's my thing. I like to be within 3 feet of the person. The Barbara Walters interview, she's 10 feet away.
Yeah.
When I'm 3 feet away from them and I lock my eyes onto their eyes, they are stuck on me.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that often Jens is kind of poking me saying you're dipping your shoulder into the frame, because the eye line now, he is kind of right over there. If I move this way just a wee bit, I'm in the frame. But I need to have him have that zooming capability and have to him focus on the entire camera process so that I can get, like you said, the whole thing are the words.
Well,
that connection can't be broken between you and the
cannot be broken.
We've done. I mean, I've shot a lot of stuff with primes, and I either live with it, and that's it, and I'm not going to make an inter-camera cut or whatever. I know I'm going to just use 1 or 2 bites, and I live with what the prime is. Or, after 15 minutes, we change the prime, or we move the camera in, and I say, let's go back, and I don't stop. The DP is just doing it. He's just changing. We just prearrange it. He's just changing, and I say, let's go back and tell me that story again by word, because I didn't understand whatever. So I have a second angle.
It's to change the shot size
make
for
the
cutting.
cut, to change the.
Why in the world
focal
wouldn't you
length.
just use a zoom lens?
Well, because in some low light things and for depth of field, and some things the primes are better. The primes can be can be better. I mean, like we use an 85 prime, a Rokin an 85 prime that this is just an incredible good portrait interview lens, and it's
Okay.
So.
I mean, I will say something in that Giuliani interview. I had never in my life used a second camera in an interview.
Or that's let alone such a side angle like that.
Side angle.
It's worth
and the client made me do it. And I fought them on it.
And now you do it all the time, right?
And now I do it all the time because you don't need B-roll in that situation. And there were some nice moments where it cut to him saying the same thing on the side. And so the lesson there is don't be so sure yourself. Some people have some other ideas.
Right. This last series I did was the first time I've done 2 cameras on an interview, and I had to be talked into it. But because we'd done some commercials that way, and a woman I worked with who was picking up people, she says, why don't we just do this 2 cameras? I said, yeah, but I'll never use it, and you got too much stuff, and I don't want this thing that looked like television where we're here and now we're cutting to that angle, and it just looks like TV or a commercial. I'm really glad I did.
I know,
and I like it, and I've sold out. I've totally sold out.
It's nice.
Yeah.
And you can even do it without an operator.
Yeah.
But we had an operator, and there was a nice moment where he was on his hands and moved to his head, and I liked that moment a lot. And I was glad that it happened on the words that I wanted.
Exactly.
What were you going to say, Hans?
Well, then we went completely the other direction with our Film Fellows series. How many? It was 6 cameras.
Oh, yeah.
Moving cameras, and then interviewing 3 people and a host. And so that interaction you talked about earlier between guests was interesting too.
Yeah.
It's a whole different kind of interview thing, but I really like it. And a lot of people did.
You want to talk about how you cut interviews?
Well, that was the next topic I want to get at. Do you have another question, Rachel, or?
We do. We've actually got a lot coming in. So
Okay.
guys, if while you're watching, if you guys can just like the questions that are your favorite ones, and I can make sure we focus on those so we
Okay,
can
shoot.
get the most important ones in. The one that's got the most likes currently is from Jason Gamble Harder, who says, what's the single longest interview these guys have ever shot in one session or sitting? I always think after about an hour and a half, it really drags energy-wise.
I would agree.
I rarely spend more than 20 minutes. I think
40
you shot
max.
after 20, and after that 20, I take a break. If I need more, I'll come back and do another 10 or 15. 90, I think there's diminishing returns at some point. With amateurs, if it's a pro, if you got George Clooney or somebody's a super pro, then it's different. But
It depends how the conversation's going. Like this conversation, we're on 39 minutes, and I feel like the energy's really good. And we have had a situation, I don't remember who it was, where we did the interview over 2 days. We did a little bit one day, a little bit the next day.
You had to break it up.
Yeah, great question. Next.
Yeah, I'm going to combine a couple here. We've got tips for interviewing in live environments as compared to sit downs. That's from Jeremy Berger. We had a question earlier as well about tips for run and gun interviewing. If you guys can maybe talk about that a little bit.
I do a lot of that.
I don't do that much of that.
I do a lot. Wireless. Somebody with a reflector, and you just go for it. And the key is, have them. Don't do some walking and talking. Put them in places where they're doing an activity. So, for instance, I did the scientist who invented latex years ago for DuPont. He loved to garden. We went out to his garden.
Love
we just
that.
shot him gardening while he was talking. All different angles, for an hour in the garden. I've taken people into hardware stores. Somebody's a hobbyist. Somebody was a sports car, aficionado. We took them to like a racetrack, not with the bad sound, but into the pits before, the race, and had him talking about things as he's looking at the cars and stuff. It also, if you do the live thing in a place of interest for the person rather than someplace arbitrary, you really get bonus stuff. They come alive. They meet, they're interested in what the environment is you put them in.
That's brilliant. I love that technique. As a matter of fact, I forgot, we did do that once. We shot a guy in a woodworking shop, and we shot an artist painting, remember?
Yeah.
I forgot about that, but that's a
Small
great
batch
question, and I would piggyback on something you said. Never make anybody perform. This is a documentary, so like if you're trying to get them to hit their marks on a walk and talk, that's performance, man. That's too hard.
And those live things, look for the chances when you only need one, and keep trying it. When you can pan from the melons in the fruit market to the person saying the exact line. And if they miss the line, it's no good. Do it 10 times till they say something valuable, and then you can use that as an intercut in your piece.
I would do it with multiple cameras, because I never have ever asked anybody to repeat something.
No, you don't repeat. They're just going on. So if somebody's talking.
Yeah.
Let's say
like in that Giuliani thing where they went from his hands to his face.
They're telling their life story, right? And you have this great shot of the fruit, and you're coming up to him, but now he's saying or it's a bad part of the story. Just keep going until you get the time when you come off the cantaloupes, and he says, and that's when my mother taught me that lesson. Boom,
Don't worry so much
That's
about
more powerful than just B-roll.
Yeah.
Because there's no cut
exactly.
in there.
Okay.
But B-roll is still important.
He brought up a great topic, the and the ums. Like we used to do a lot of interviews with Booker No, which is Jim Beam's grandson, because we worked for Jim Beam for years, and he was like and when we would edit it, it looked like a pizza puzzle, man. It was just like, and we used a lot of B-roll and did these sort of dissolves on top of him, which I know you hate, but I love.
So time change,
Yeah.
When I have an I say at the end of the whole thing, I say, can you just say these 4 sentences for me? I've taken like stuff out that I've heard, and I have them say at the end, just have them repeat and perform.
So you can insert words?
The 4 sentences. No, so I can have at least 4 clean sentences for all the other so I don't have to, so I can find someplace I don't have to do a cutaway to do all the other he's doing.
That's good. I mean, we have a technique where we just get people, I just get them to laugh and smile. There was one moment in the Giuliani interview, which I actually liked, where he was speaking, and there was like this half dissolve where he was just kind of sort of laughing, it was moving away. You can use those kinds of, it's good to have a nice happy moment that you can cut to if you need to.
Hey, I mean, here's the other thing though. Remember that as important as it is to have the people say what you need in these things, it is a visual medium, and the pictures matter. So when I used to cut the interviews, so you have 20 minutes of an interview, or sometimes more. What do you use? You're only going to use 18 seconds. You might need 24 seconds. I would spin through, in old days on tape fast, and I would look for stuff where people come alive. I wouldn't sit and listen to the thing. I'd turn the sound off. I would just spin through, and I'd say, these are the 12 moments where this person looks alive.
Right.
Then I'd go to the sound, and they're saying junk, or they're telling a joke or whatever. But if one of them worked and was alive and somehow worked, then I built the whole piece around that with the cutaways.
Well, you know what I did is, like, when you were warming them up at the beginning and just getting to know them, I would be rolling. And you'd catch moments
Sometimes
of
the
them
best part.
laughing or whatever,
exactly.
and you could use a lot of that.
Yeah, because that does bring a dead person to life.
Don't turn the camera. I always go handheld for the last questions too. And when we're done, I take the camera off when I know we're getting to the end. I shoot it handheld, and then I say, okay, we're done, and I just put the camera down, and then sometimes somebody sits and they talk on and on. I just pick the camera back up and I just keep going.
That happens on this show all
Yeah,
the time.
that's
when
the
it's
after
over.
interview.
The after interview, right?
Yeah, this thing
Sometimes
goes
the only
on
thing
for
you
20
use.
minutes after. People don't realize we should have the after show.
Right, when you wrap, keep shooting, even
Yeah,
though you're
exactly.
wrapped.
Or just the audio. I learned
Right.
something from you today. I am going
Turn
to
the
do
audio
the
off last.
audio thing because I can always get B-roll.
Right.
What do you got?
Sound
Rachel?
guys know with me that they don't stop when they don't stop till the camera is not only in the case but we're driving away. That's when the audio guys wrap. Go ahead.
Right.
Go on.
We got one more question before the next. We should probably roll the next clip from Chris Bryant, who says, when interviewing someone that is doing poorly, but you really need to get some good sound bites from him or her, what are some tips to get them calm?
This is what I would do. Again, you need to know what his passion is, and you need to tap into his passion. If somebody were to interview me and they start talking about electric bikes, they know I'm going to come alive. Then you build that rapport and you shift it into what you want to, and literally you shift it. You might say, okay, so do you ever take your electric bikes to this place? When you go to wherever, yeah.
But there are cases where people, and the question's a good one, where no matter, somebody can be really charming and you think they're going to be great on camera and they just freeze, or they stop, or it's just not as good as you remember them. The trick is to remember you can't shoot reality and get reality. So you got to find a way to, I mean, the real guy is charming and great, but the guy on camera is not, and
So
it's
shut
not
off
reality.
the camera, supposedly.
Somehow, shut off the camera. Yeah, we do that. That's times when we shut off the camera, we try something else. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work. There's, some people are just very self-conscious, or they're adverse to giving you what you want, or it's a game to them, and I end up yelling at those people actually and get a reaction.
Yeah, that's one way to do
and I
it.
genuinely am yelling at them. I'm pissed off. I'm not faking it, and sometimes I get something back.
Yeah,
So
I've
what
done that
about
once.
I was going to get into what about techniques for the interview that's going to be a conflict, that is going to be a conflict, like with Stephen Poster.
Oh God! Don't say that. That was literally, this was an interview where we screamed at each other for 35 minutes, and Jens was just like, "Oh my
I've never
God!"
seen you like that.
I just lost it.
Did you get anything at the end of it?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, there was a great moment that we pulled out of it.
Yeah, there was some
But
good stuff.
he was angry at me, and I was angry at him. We're great friends now, but it was the weirdest interview ever done.
Yeah, that's happened.
Yeah, but how about this thing? When you do an interview or you're doing, like 40 interviews for a particular film, and you go, God, this one was amazing. When you get back into the editing room, you're like, the one that you thought was shit was great, and the one that you thought was great was shit.
We would always say, back in the film days when we'd get transferred and we'd sit on Beta SP, we'd go, okay, and it would all seem great. We'd get in and we'd say, let's look at it on what we'd call the suck box. Let's look on the suck box, which would be like just a Beta SP player into like a little 13-inch monitor, and it would be like, you're right. I mean, so one of the things that has come with experience is that happens less and less. I'm pretty much, if it is, it is, and if it is, it isn't. But for a long time, it was really, you did think something was great, but it was too much on camera, or it was too. It's hard to separate the real person here and the interaction of the people when you're doing this with what the lens is really laying down.
Right.
Well, your
it's really
perception
hard.
at the moment
Your perception at the
live
moment.
can be way
Yeah.
different than how
Right.
the camera
All right,
sees
I want to
it.
show a clip, because now I want to shift this into editing. As with a documentary, really the editor is the writer of the story.
Yeah.
Because you could, I've often wanted to do this test where I give this footage to 5 different editors and see 5 different stories come out. Let's roll the clip of this one editorial style, and I don't know if it's the good one or the bad one, or I don't care, but I'm going to show an example of something that I did that I hate and something that I did that I like.
Sounds good.
So roll one.
Light is a particle and a wave at the same time.
Light, the absence of dark.
The light is used to create shadows.
It's the light that enters the lens and strikes the chip or the emulsion.
It's an energy that reveals.
It's also your biggest enemy as well as your biggest friend, because it works against you as well as for you.
Light to me is like paint to an artist.
Every light that
that enters a space has a causative effect.
You know, light is a form of expression, a form of storytelling. Light is pretty much life.
Light is my path to creating images.
I'm going to tell you why I don't like that. Light, 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 light. Now play the proper version of something else that I actually did like.
It's a difficult question.
How would I answer that?
A cinematographer is a storyteller.
But you're using pictures.
The eyes of the director.
We visualize the written word.
Someone who has a photographic eye and an ability to tell stories visually.
An interpreter who uses light and composition to affect an audience's perception of what's going on in that story.
To bring to fruition the vision of the director.
And then I work out how to make his dream or her dream come alive and get it on the screen.
Cinematography is about defining light and space.
He's got to be more than an artist, he's got to be a great leader.
An artist and a craftsman and a psychologist and a lover.
You are moving the emotions.
Goodbye.
You're telling a story. You're creating a mood. You're building character. You are touching a human being without the person realizing.
It makes me laugh every time. But I'll tell you why I did not like the first one and why I did like this one. When I was asking the questions and I was thinking about how I want to edit it in my head, and I like the second version where they only say the word cinematography twice, but it feels like one continuous sentence. And the first one was just a bunch of statements about light, and I don't like that.
Well, you put your finger on a key thing about all this, which is if you can make the audience pull the answer out themselves rather than give it to them, it always sits with them long. And we do this in countless political ads we've done over the years, or marketing things, where if you don't, so in light, you know, the first one, you know, you're asking, you know, what is the question about light? It takes you a while on the second one to realize what is cinematography to you? And once I put that question in my head,
you were answering.
I'm answering. I feel much more involved. You know, I'm part of the conversation.
Right.
You know, and that's a tricky. It's always a tricky thing. Is how much we call it hard and soft messages. How many times? When do you have to be hard and just stick it out there, and when can you be soft and let somebody pull it out at the end for themselves?
Well, like I said earlier, that technique of having that say light is an important technique for driving something in a message.
Yeah, because frequency
matters.
Sometimes
like in a commercial or whatever, but it can be a little irritating in other situations.
No, that's right.
Okay, Jens, you just did something that is a valuable learning lesson. He said, like I said before.
Oh, yeah.
And he knows where I'm going here. Never, ever, ever talk to the person you're going to interview prior to talking to the person you're going to interview. They often come and they're like, oh, hi, how are you? And it's very easy to get into the conversation. We did this. Just before you sat down, we started talking about this. I was like, okay, let's hold it for the interview. Because what happens is they'll do exactly what Jens said. Oh, like I said before. Oh, like I said before. You don't want to do that.
Just
you
cut
want
that.
You get what?
Just cut like I said before. Just start after that.
It's a one-take environment.
Yeah.
So we literally, when Jens and I walk into a room, we're like, stop. We don't want to talk to you at all.
Yes, but I do think there are times when you can talk to somebody ahead of time, like on the phone, not on set day, but on. I often interview these cancer victims. I talk to them well ahead of time. Someplace, I talk to them in a casual conversation. Oftentimes, I also talk to their family members, and then I learn different things from different people, and then I put them together. So I know this from this person, I know this from this person, but they don't know that each, and you can create some sort of thing.
I would say the one thing, my one piece of advice would be, ask them questions that they don't think in a million years you're going to ask them. Because at that point, we're veering them into uncharted space. Right. It's like when you work with actors. You separate scene partners and you give them different dialogues. No, you give them different expectations of what you want them to do going into the scene, so that when they come in,
right,
there's conflict.
But the other key thing is, you don't want to cut. It's always great if you can interview a born storyteller. They just tell stories because it's about stories, and you want people to just tell the stories. And one of the things I think I've done over the years to try to get people just to tell stories is to get props from their life or props from their passions or something there to generate a story about something that they can tell a story, put them in a place. That way you don't have to if you can have somebody just spin the story out in 27 seconds, 36 seconds, even 42 seconds, boom, without a cut, that's the best thing you can get. That's the best possible thing.
I want to get your advice, Jens. You've done thousands and thousands of hours of interviews with me. What is your piece of advice to a young filmmaker?
Well, a lot of it is what we discussed. I mean, you have to, even if you're just a shooter, not the director, you have to know your subject. You have to be in tune with what they're saying and anticipate. You know what I mean? And without educating yourself on the subject matter or who that person is, you won't be able to anticipate as well, and you might not catch that framing of that moment or that zoom in or whatever it is that we want to do. So you have to bone up on it just like the director does.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because there was a time when we had to do those interviews of those Harvard Business School dudes, and people were like, well, the client was like, "You're not going to be able to talk to them. You didn't even go to college, and yet let alone Harvard." And I said, "Don't worry about it." I said, "We're going to be talking about people are people," and we actually found that these guys were kind of dumb.
That's right.
Maybe not deep thinkers.
There just was no emotion in them. And really, the interviews to me have to be all about emotion. And we took them out of their comfort zone. Take people out of their comfort zone.
We just offended all of Harvard now.
One more thing on that is we see so many things now that are really, I don't call it homemade small pictures or documentaries that are so successful because there's an intimacy to them and an authenticity of maybe just. There's a film called Strad Style that won the Slam Dance Award a couple years ago. It's just one filmmaker, mic on camera, wiring guy, a guy making violins, okay? It's one guy made the film. The intimacy of doing something like that sometimes creates these wonderful, wonderful things, okay? So when you have something bigger, try to recreate that intimacy. If I have a subject and I have a sound man and 2 lighting guys and me, if we have 5-person crew or makeup or 6 or 9 or 15 sometimes, sometimes 3, I always say to the person, we're all here and we're equal. It's like football. Everybody has to run the plays. Okay, you're one of us today. You're going to have more fun today than doing your job, than doing anything else, because we're fun. But you're one of us, and we're all doing this together. We're not interviewing you. We're all doing this together. You're part of this. And I also encourage people on the set, if they have a question, to blurt it out. For instance, I did
a crew member.
A crew member, yeah. Right. So we did, to help create that sense of just, you're not just there in a fishbowl, to help create a sense of we're all in this together. I once interviewed one of the primary AIDS researchers, and I had encouraged the crew, I talked to the crew all the time like that, and sure enough, midway through, after she finished saying something, the gaffer sitting over there, somebody said, "But how about in latex and a condom? You get AIDS, blah, blah, if oral sex, whatever it was," okay, he asked. And she said, "Yes, because," and all I did was say,
"Just look at me."
Just look at me. And give that, and it was a home run answer, and it just, so just keep it fun.
That first piece of advice you said. With regards to the second part, I've had issue with that, because no matter how hard you try, they are going to do this.
You mean look at the person?
They're going to look at that other person, and it's going to just be an audio interview, which is fine.
Right.
But that is a bitch in that. Rachel, I'm going to spin this back to you. If you got questions, want to wrap it up, whatever you want.
I think we've got one last question, which would be a good fit to end on. For people watching who maybe want to go practice some of these techniques, Jeremy's asking, how can you practice interviewing outside of the high-pressure situation of a shoot?
Interview your mom.
Family.
She's probably got an incredible story.
Family.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Right.
Family, cousins.
Well, you want that anyway. You probably want to document some of your older family members' for
you
know,
did that.
posterity.
You do a
Yeah.
cousin you haven't seen for a year, talking about family history, and it tests all your skills, because sometimes they're going to be ornery. They're going to feel like uncomfortable sometimes because they don't know you in this situation, but you're both interested in the same topic. Family is your answer was
it's a great question, and I will say that
question. Yeah.
there are no better people to interview than old people.
That's it. They say anything. They
say anything. They're just so charming. They've got life experience.
They're not censoring anymore. They just say it.
Yeah. And they have something to say. So find an old person in a park and find out what he's all about.
Absolutely. And that will be a great interview, and then try to make everything else you do live up to that.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Rachel, and that was a great question.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for all your questions. And a big thank you to ICANN, who provide all the lighting for our show. Our sponsors, Canon, Rode Mics, Kessler Crane. I know there were a couple of questions we didn't get to in the hour, but I will email them to Steve and Mark and try and get you guys some answers. So we will see you in a couple weeks. Thanks for joining us. Bye.